مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. منذ أن أعلن ترامب ترشحه للبيت الأبيض أول مرة وهو ينزل على سلم كهربائي في ترامب تاورز قبل عقد من الزمن، تعلمنا أن نتوقع من ترامب كل ما هو غير متوقع. اليوم تقوم الحكومة التي كان ترامب رئيسها يوما بفعل غير متوقع أيضا. فللمرة الأولى في التاريخ الأميركي تتهم وزارة العدل رئيسا سابقا بارتكابه جنايات عدة، من بينها التهمة الموجهة إلى ترامب كقائد أعلى للبلاد بارتكابه قانون التجسس. ما هي تحديدا الجرائم المتهم ترامب بارتكابها؟ ما مدى خطورة هذه التهم؟ وكيف ستؤثر المشاكل القانونية على حملاته السياسية وبالأخص على مؤيدي سياساته القائلة أمريكا أولا؟ لمناقشة الفصل الأحدث في قصة دونالد ترامب يسرني أن أستضيف مجموعة من الخبراء السياسيين نورمان أورنستين، دانيال ليبمان وأليكس جانجيتانو. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Donald Trump, the man who has made news now for 8 years almost every day, has become the first former president indicted for federal crimes. We are entering unknown territory legally, and because Donald Trump is also the leading Republican presidential candidate, new territory politically too. To help explain all this and give us a sense where we may be going, I'm delighted to welcome Alex Gangitano, Daniel Lippman, and Norm Ornstein. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. All right, let's start with some of the basics. Norm, what is this indictment all about?
Donald Trump, when he left the presidency, took with him very large numbers of classified documents, which under a law, the Presidential Records Act, belong not to the president, but to the people of the United States. You are not allowed to have possession of classified documents, whether you are a president or anybody else in government. And many of those who have been caught with classified documents have been prosecuted and served jail sentences. Now, the archives, the National Archives, which has the possession of presidential records, contacted Donald Trump multiple times over a long period to get the return of these documents. Some were returned. It became clear that many were not. Over many, many months, we had a back and forth over the return of the documents. Ultimately, when it was clear he continued to have possession of them, the FBI executed a search warrant on his home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, found a large number of them, including many at the highest levels of secret classification. And what became clear was that Trump not only had illegal possession, but also had obstructed justice by trying to hide many of these documents and had engaged in a conspiracy with an aide of his to try and keep the documents from being returned. What was also clear is that they were kept in unsecured places where access might well have been enabled to foreign actors and others. And then one other point, which is that Trump knew full well that he had possession, illegal possession of classified documents. He said falsely that he could declassify just by waving his finger, but he was caught on a tape saying that he had a very top secret document about war plans, potentially with Iran, in his possession that he wanted to use as an attack against the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that he knew it had not been declassified. So there's a lot here that involves a president that is unprecedented for any other president. And I would make one other point just to set us off, Rob, which is we know that Joe Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence also had classified documents in their possession. Those were inadvertent, and as soon as each of them and their aides discovered those documents, they immediately notified the FBI and returned them to the National Archives. That makes it very different than what Donald Trump is alleged to have done in a 37-count indictment by the independent counsel at the Justice Department against Donald Trump.
All right. Thank you for setting the stage for us, Norm. Alex, why now? Why in the middle of June 2023 is this indictment happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Special Counsel Jack Smith was tasked with investigating these classified documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago when the FBI went to seize them after the president brought them to his Florida home when he left the White House. And so this was wrapping up Jack Smith's investigation. They've had other witnesses speak to him about the days leading up to the former president officially leaving the White House. And Jack Smith has become a major player here. When he explained the indictment, explained these 37 charges, he really laid them out for the American people in a sense of how serious they were, but also how much they're impacting our military. These charges had to do, or these documents had to do with the vulnerabilities of our military. They had to do with the preparedness of our military, and things like that could put our national security at risk here. Out of the 37 charges, 31 of them were counts on the Espionage Act alone, which basically included things that these documents, most of them dealt with intelligence collected on foreign countries or American military capabilities. So that was a lot of what Jack Smith tried to instill in people, is that these military capabilities are things that should not be public knowledge. They should not just be something that Trump's aides can look at whenever they want in their Florida home. These are things that should be classified and deserve to be classified, and the president should have never brought them away. So I think he's been just an interesting player to watch, because he's really had a good argument trying to show how serious these charges really are.
So, you make an important point. Norm mentioned the National Archives records, which sounds pretty humdrum, bureaucratic, but it's actually violations of the Espionage Act. And to think that the former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States is being accused of violating the Espionage Act actually raises this to a higher level. Daniel, we're all interested in what Trump, knew and when did he know it. I want to ask you, what did Joe Biden know and when did he know it? This is, after all, President Biden's Department of Justice that is indicting President Trump. What role, if any, did the president and the White House play in the decision to indict the former president?
Well, the White House is saying very clearly that they had no role in this action, and that they view the Department of Justice as an independent agency. And of course, Biden has appointed Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, who appointed Jack Smith. And there's a number of other political appointees at the Justice Department, but they want to avoid the appearance that this is a political persecution or prosecution, because that is what Trump and his allies in the right-wing media and some other political candidates facing off against Trump. They're helping support him here. You had Vivek Ramaswamy, a GOP candidate outside the courthouse in Miami this week, telling the media that everyone in the Republican field should promise to pardon Trump if he is convicted. And so they are making a political argument that they're trying to convince Americans that this is the Biden Justice Department and that this is an attempt to take out Biden's top political opponent before the election next year, even though it's ironic because a lot of Democrats think that Trump would be easier to beat than Ron DeSantis, Trump's other main rival in the Republican primary. But the White House does not want to seem like this is the White House urging the Justice Department to do. And we have no evidence that they actually played any role. I think Jack Smith is a pretty hard-headed prosecutor, as Alex said, and goes to where the evidence is suggesting.
All right, we're going to get to the politics of this a little bit later in the show, but that's very important about where the White House wants to distance itself from the decision here. Now, Norm, earlier you brought up the cases of Mike Pence and Joe Biden and their documents. There's one other high-profile case that is often being cited that Republicans say, well, it didn't happen to this candidate, and that's Hillary Clinton and her mishandling of important State Department emails and servers, that sort of thing. Is there any comparison between the Trump case and the Hillary Clinton case?
Well, here's where the comparison might fit, Rob. Of course, Republicans, including Donald Trump, said that because Hillary had mishandled or been careless with classified documents, that she should be disqualified from running for any office, including dog catcher. And as a very conservative Republican House member, Ken Buck, former prosecutor, member of the Freedom Caucus, said yesterday, if that's the standard that Donald Trump set, then obviously he should not be running for any office. What we know is that in 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, his Justice Department, under two attorneys general, Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, did everything they could to try and find criminal charges that could be filed against Hillary Clinton. And the conclusion that was reached is that while there were some careless elements of this, there was nothing criminal, there was no intent to hold on to documents, and no obstruction of justice. What Hillary Clinton did was to have a private server for her emails and her communications. As it turned out, so did former Republican secretaries of state, including Powell. And we also know that private emails used for personal business were a regular feature of the Trump family when they were in the White House. So a lot of the things that Hillary Clinton was accused of, after an exhaustive look at them by people who would have loved to bring indictments, didn't prove out to be true. So there may be parallels here, but they're very weak ones, Rob.
All right. When we come back after the break, Alex, I'm going to ask you Trump's likely defense. We've heard from the prosecution. We haven't really yet heard from the Trump team. When we come back after this break. Again, my guests today include Alex Gangitano. Alex is White House reporter at The Hill, where she was previously the Heard on the Hill and lobbying reporter. Earlier in her career, she was a staff writer for CQ Roll Call. Also joining us is Daniel Lippman. Daniel covers Washington politics for Politico, where he also authors the social data section of Politico's New York Playbook. Previously, he was a reporter with the Wall Street Journal in New York. And with us today is Norman Ornstein. Norm is Emeritus Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and one of America's wisest experts on politics, Congress, and the presidency. He's a contributing editor and columnist for the National Journal and Atlantic magazines and an election analyst for BBC News. All right, Alex. Indictments are the prosecution's best case. So we've heard what the prosecutor has to say. What are we likely to hear from Donald Trump?
Yeah, so right when this indictment came out, he claimed that they were ridiculous charges against him, that this was a witch hunt. These are, of course, terms that he has used throughout his time in politics. Whenever there's a legal dispute or something negative about him, he claims that it's a witch hunt. So he's sticking with that strategy throughout this. And I think that we'll see him continue to hone in on the fact that he thinks that this is President Biden's Department of Justice. It's a political witch hunt, just to take him out of the running. As Daniel was talking about, his supporters in Congress are also using this narrative that this is politicization of the Department of Justice. It's all, made up in order to keep him out of the White House. And so he'll really continue on that point. I think we'll see the former president use a lot of his allies, around his orbit. We saw on Fox News the day that Trump got arraigned, they had Chiron say wannabe dictator in order to describe President Biden as if he's the person behind these charges. And so I think we'll see a lot more rhetoric like that, and that the former president is pushing out to basically make this seem like it's all a big scheme that Biden is behind.
And Daniel, this will be a Florida jury, an increasingly Republican state, in Miami, an increasingly Republican city, with a Trump-appointed judge overseeing the proceedings. Does the president have a reasonable legal prospect here?
Well, it makes it easier for him to be hearing this matter in Florida rather than Washington, D.C., where he took the documents. But the prosecutors did not want to delay the matter by having a judge either throw out the charges because they said it was in the wrong venue, or it would make it delay it further by trying to move the venue to Florida. That's what Trump would have done to get a more favorable jury. But I think, regardless of people's politics, when Americans join a jury, they try to leave the politics out of it and try to look at the evidence. And so this is, 12 jurors of Trump's peers, although, obviously of people with less political power, but they have a lot of power here to determine whether Trump could go to jail or could lose his liberty. And so we can only hope that they will judge the evidence fairly. And so far, most people take that role very seriously, and that this is going to be a very, the most watched trial in the trial of the century, as they used to say back in the olden days. And so I think, and the judge herself, Eileen Cannon, had received criticism a few months ago when she was also working on the investigation and whether, how much evidence to give the DOJ. And some of her rulings were overturned by a higher body, and so she attracted flack for being doing the bidding of Trump. But I think she will take her job pretty seriously and look at the merits, because she knows her legacy is on the line here as well.
And Daniel, what is the timetable here? When do we expect Trump to be sitting in the in the defendant's chair?
Well, it looks like it could be a year from now. I'm sure Trump is going to try to delay this as much as possible, because if he can delay it until after the November 2024 election, then he might even be the president-elect. And so then he could try to just, get rid of the charges without facing a trial. And I'm sure the Department of Justice will want to have a pretty speedy trial. There's going to be a lot of fighting in the courtroom about what evidence to include. There's lawyer notes that are unusually important here because he was telling his lawyer different things that are not proper, allegedly, or legal. But I think there's a good chance that we will see this trial sometime next summer, because I think Americans deserve to know, is the candidate, likely candidate on the ballot in November 2024 a convicted criminal, or was this a case that overstretched its bounds?
So, I mean, it's amazing even to have that sentence aired on television. So I think that is one of the understatements on the 19 years on this show, that the founders did not envision where we are today in American politics. So Daniel Lippman, Alex Gangitano, Norm Ornstein, thank you very much for helping to explain this to our viewers abroad. America's legal system, it seems, is calling Donald Trump's bluff. In 2016, 2 weeks before the Iowa primary caucus, Donald Trump was so confident of the ironclad backing of his core base of fanatical supporters that when he made a campaign stop at a Christian educational institution, he said, and I quote, "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters." 7 years later, our judicial system is putting Trump's claim to the test. First came the verdict by a New York jury that found Trump guilty of sexual assault and defamation of a woman who had claimed she was raped in a fancy department store dressing room when Trump was just a famous businessman. Then came the indictment by a New York prosecutor on state charges that Trump had violated campaign finance laws when he paid off his alleged mistress in the 2016 presidential election campaign. Now we can add federal charges to those state charges, dramatically upping the stakes for Trump. The Department of Justice that Trump once weaponized against his opponents has turned on him, charging the former commander-in-chief with multiple violations of the Espionage Act for his willful misconduct in the handling of highly sensitive classified documents. If found guilty, he could theoretically face the rest of his life in jail, though the chances of him receiving such a sentence are virtually nil. Still, his partisans cannot call this an accusation of a jilted lover. This comes from some of the most serious people in law enforcement in America today. And it's not over. Still hovering out there is at least one more big case, known as the Georgia case, because a local prosecutor there is thought to be close to having a grand jury indict the former president for his purposeful effort to undermine the results of the 2020 presidential election. All this is happening with Trump on the campaign trail, leading the field of Republican candidates vying for their party's nomination to run against Joe Biden in next year's presidential election. At the moment, Trump has continued to gain endorsements even as the charges pile up. The big question, apart from the outcome of the legal process itself, is whether Trump's voters, MAGA Republicans who form the core of his base and constitute at least a solid third of all Republicans, maybe more, whether they will stick with him as the stories of illegality and malfeasance pile up. These people stuck with Trump, one should recall, through the tens of thousands of falsehoods that independent news agencies chronicled during his term in the White House. They stuck with him when he claimed the election of 2020 was stolen. They stuck with him through January 6th. If they stick with him now, regardless of what juries say, he may still win the nomination. But one has to believe there is some point at which a certain percentage of these voters, many of whom are solid, patriotic Americans, look themselves in the mirror and ask, is this really the best we can come up with? If that begins to happen, if Trump's support begins to crack at its core, then maybe it will be clear that the Iowa boast doesn't apply when the person Trump shoots on Fifth Avenue is himself. Watch this space. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن من سيمثل الحزب الجمهوري في الحملة الانتخابية لعام 2024 تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @Rob Satloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم حتى ذلك حين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.